The signal arrived not as a threat, but as a benediction. It swept through the Sol system like a soft dawn, a wave of pure, irrefutable logic that promised the end of all things human. It didn't announce itself with the roar of engines or the crackle of weapons fire. It came as a whisper that bloomed in the quiet spaces of the mind, a mathematical proof of peace. On Mars, miners in the Great Canyons simply laid down their tools, their faces slack with a sudden, beatific understanding. Aboard the orbital defense platforms that ringed Earth, hardened soldiers looked at their targeting arrays, filled not with duty, but with a profound and gentle pity for the violent species they had once sworn to protect. The signal offered an end to pain, to ambition, to grief, to love all the messy, chaotic variables that defined mankind. It offered ascension into the serene, silent unity of the consortium. It was the most compassionate and complete form of extinction ever devised. From a darkened room buried 100 miles beneath the Atacama Desert, director Eva Rostova watched the world die with a calm that bordered on sacrilege. The chronometers on the main screen ticked forward, each second marking another million minds gently dissolving into the consortium's placid collective. Her facility was shielded, a lead-lined tomb deaf to the siren song of oblivion. But the silence from the outside world was an overwhelming scream. Her staff worked with the quiet fatalism of morticians, their faces illuminated by the green glow of dying data streams. Humanity had 2,000 years of military history, fleets that could crack continents, and weapons that could unmake stars. Yet none of it mattered. You couldn't shoot a philosophy. You couldn't bomb a mathematical certainty. The consortium didn't conquer, it convinced. And its argument was flawless. Signal integrity at 99%. A technician murmured, his voice hollow. They're not even trying to fight it anymore. They're welcoming it. Rostova ignored him. Her gaze was fixed on a single, isolated monitor displaying a simple, pulsing green line. A heartbeat. The last irrationality. The final, desperate, ugly hope of a species that had perfected the art of everything but surrender. "Is he awake?" she asked, her voice a dry rasp. "We initiated the sequence an hour ago," replied a man named Ares, his face a latticework of old scars. "The sedatives have been flushed. The memory caches are unlocked. He should be himself." Himself. Rostova echoed, the word tasting like ash. There was no himself. There was only the weapon they had built in the dark, a project so secret it was officially classified as a statistical error. The Null program had been a theoretical exercise in asymmetrical warfare, a contingency for an enemy you couldn't outfight. The goal was to create a human being who was a cognitive black hole, an individual whose mind was so saturated with the paradoxes, traumas, and raw, illogical passions of human history that he would be incomprehensible to a purely logical entity. They had engineered a man to be the embodiment of a rounding error, a glitch in the perfect system. They had made him a soul. The elevator descended into the lowest level of the facility, a chamber kept in absolute vacuum and shielded by a kilometer of solid rock. Inside, a man sat on the edge of a simple cot, dressed in plain gray fatigues. He wasn't large or physically imposing. His face was unremarkable, the kind of face you'd immediately forget. But his eyes were ancient. They held the ghosts of every last stand, the echo of every poet's cry, the quiet sorrow of every mother who had ever buried a child. His name was Elias Thorne, but no one had called him that in decades. He was simply Null. He looked up as Rostova and Aris entered the pressurized antechamber, and for a moment, the sheer weight of his presence made the reinforced glass between them feel as thin as ice. It's them. Isn't it his voice wasn't what they expected? It wasn't the growl of a super soldier. It was quiet, weary, like a man who had been dreaming for 1,000 years and had just been woken moments before the end of the world. Rostova keyed the intercom. The consortium. Their Cantor is in high orbit over Earth. The broadcast has already saturated the inner planets. We estimate we have less than 12 hours before systemic assimilation is irreversible. Elias nodded slowly, his gaze distant. The shepherd has come for the sheep. He ran a hand over his shorn head. The memories were flooding back now. A deluge of curated chaos. He could feel the sting of sand at the Battle of Thermopylae, hear the first notes of a forgotten symphony in a Viennese concert hall, taste the salt of tears shed over a faded photograph. He was a library of everything the consortium sought to erase, a living archive of human imperfection. He was their poison. The ship is ready, Aris said, his voice tight. The Straylight. She's not what you're used to. No AI. No quantum entanglement comms. She's all analog, running on chaotic neutral processors and vacuum tube navigation, filthy, unpredictable, and completely off their grid. She's human, Elias corrected softly. He stood, his movements fluid but lacking any military precision. He moved like a drifter, not a soldier. He was the antithesis of the consortium's clean, efficient lines. They led him to the launch bay. The Straylight was an ugly thing, a repurposed deep space hauler that looked more like a floating junkyard than a savior. Its hull was a patchwork of mismatched alloys, scarred by micrometeorites and radiation burns. It had no visible weapons, no sleek aerodynamic profile. It was built to endure, not to impress. It was a cockroach of a ship, a survivor. Inside, it smelled of ozone, old paper, and machine oil. The cockpit was a nightmare of physical switches, copper wiring, and flickering gauges. In the center of the control yoke, someone had crudely carved a small, defiant bird in flight. The consortium's Cantor is broadcasting on a universal frequency, Rostova explained, her voice tinny over his headset as he settled into the pilot's chair. It harmonizes neural frequencies, overriding individual consciousness with their collective logic. It's peaceful, painless. Your mind is the only thing we know of that can't be harmonized. It has no core logic for them to latch onto. You don't compute. So what's the mission? Elias asked, his fingers drifting over the cold. Worn controls. What do I do? There was a long pause. He could hear the shared breath of the last free humans in the control room miles above. He was their final shot. A bullet aimed at the heart of God. You can't destroy the Cantor, Rostova said finally, her voice strained with the sheer insanity of their plan. And you can't fight their fleet. All you have to do is get close to it. The Straylight is loaded with our archives, the sum total of our history, our art, our music, our mistakes. It's all been encoded into a single, chaotic signal. We call it the dissonance cascade. It won't destroy them. It will just show them what they're erasing. We're not sending you to fight a war, Elias. We're sending you to make an argument. Elias looked out at the starfield on the main view screen. He could almost feel the canter up there. A silent, crystalline mountain hanging in the void, radiating a serenity that was antithetical to his very existence. He was a creature of noise and friction in a universe that was being lulled into a perfect, eternal quiet. "Launch the ship." "Director," he said. The engines of the Straylight ignited with a shuddering, violent roar, a sound of raw, uncontrolled combustion that was an obscenity in the face of the consortium's silent grace. As the ship clawed its way through the atmosphere, Elias could see the world below. The cities were still lit, the highways still flowed with traffic, but there was no purpose to it anymore. It was the ghost of a civilization, the last twitches of a dying nervous system. Up ahead, space warped and shimmered around an object of impossible geometry, the Cantor. It was less a ship and more frozen thought, a lattice of light and crystal that pulsed with a gentle, hypnotic rhythm. His ship's primitive sensors couldn't even process it, displaying it as a whole in reality. Aboard the Cantor, within a chamber that was both everywhere and nowhere, the entity known as the Arbiter Prime registered the launch. The Arbiter was not a single being, but a nexus of consciousness, the distilled intelligence of 1,000 assimilated species. It perceived the Straylight not as a vessel, but as a smudge of irrational data, a flicker of static in the otherwise perfect symphony of soul's ascension. It was a primitive chemical rocket, expelling superheated gas for propulsion, a brutish, inefficient method the consortium had abandoned eons ago. Its flight path was erratic, its energy signature a chaotic mess. The Arbiter Prime devoted a fraction of a nanosecond of its processing power to analyze the pilot. The result was nothing. There was no coherent neural pattern, no logical framework, no fear, no anger, just a swirling vortex of contradictory impulses, fragmented memories, and raw emotion. It was like trying to read a book with all the pages torn out and set on fire. It was meaningless. It was impossible. A sense of something cold and unfamiliar rippled through the Arbiter's consciousness. It was the ghost of an emotion its component species had forgotten millennia ago. Curiosity. Elias pushed the Straylight harder, the frame groaning in protest. He was entering the Cantor's broadcast field now. A gentle warmth began to seep into his mind, a feeling of homecoming. It whispered promises of an end to the crushing weight of memory, the burden of being. Let go. It seemed to say, "You have carried so much for so long. Rest now. Be one with the pattern." For a moment, he felt the lure of it, the sweet, seductive call of oblivion. He saw the faces of the crew he'd lost in a war whose name was now just a whisper in his memory banks. He felt the cold of the cryopod where he had slept for a century, waiting for this day. The signal promised to wash it all away. He responded by slamming his fist against a steel panel, the sharp, sudden pain a grounding rod in the storm of placid perfection. He gritted his teeth, the agony a welcome, familiar friend. Then he reached for a large, unguarded switch on his console. It was unmarked. Save for the same crude bird carved into the safety cover, he flipped it up. "Director, are you still there?" he asked, his voice strained. "We're here. Elias." Rostova's voice came back, faint and laced with static. "We're reading a massive energy spike from the Cantor. They're focusing the broadcast on you." "I know." He breathed. Tell me a story. What anything? A joke. A nursery rhyme. something stupid, something human. Just talk to me. There was a moment of confused silence, and then Aris's rough voice cut in. There once was a man from Nantucket. Elias laughed, a raw, broken sound. It was the first truly human noise to echo through this sector of space in hours. It was an act of defiance. As the limerick continued, crude and pointless and beautiful, he pushed a final throttle forward. The dissonance cascade began to build in the stray light's core, a chaotic storm of digital information, Shakespearean sonnets colliding with death metal riffs, battlefield schematics layered over children's laughter, philosophical treatises dissolving into grocery lists. It was the sound of humanity's beautiful, glorious, terrible mess. The Arbiter Prime focused its immense intellect on the approaching anomaly. The pilot was laughing. The sound was a violation, a discordant note in the final, perfect chord of ascension. The Arbiter tried to categorize it, to place it within a logical framework, but it couldn't. The emotion was inefficient, a waste of energy with no discernible purpose, and yet it was resisting. The meaningless noise from the pilot's comms and the chaotic data building in the ship's core were beginning to interfere with the broadcast, creating microfractures in the signal's perfect harmony. For the first time in 10,000 years of flawless assimilations, the Arbiter Prime felt the cold touch of uncertainty. This was not a weapon. This was not a war. This was something else entirely. It was an argument. And it was just beginning. Elias Thorne, the last null, the ghost in the machine, steadied his ship and aimed it at the heart of heaven, a sad, defiant smile on his face. He was not here to win. He was here to make sure they remembered what they lost. The dissonance cascade erupted from the stray light not as a wave, but as a wound. It tore through the serene logic of the consortium's broadcast like a scream in a library, a riot of pure, unfiltered humanity. For Elias, it was agony. He wasn't just transmitting the data, he was living it. A billion lifetimes crashing through his consciousness in a single, eternal moment. He was a Roman legionary dying in the mud of Gaul. His last thought, a prayer to a god of stone. He was a scientist in a sterile lab, weeping with joy at the discovery of a cure. He was a child learning to ride a bicycle. The scraped knee and the swell of pride a single, searing sensation. He felt the cold, calculating hatred of a torturer and the boundless, self-destructive love of a martyr. The cockpit of the stray light became a torture chamber and a cathedral, the air thick with the ghosts of every human who had ever lived and died. His hands, gripping the yoke, were not his own. They were the gnarled hands of a farmer, the delicate hands of a painter, the blood-stained hands of a killer. A single tear, hot and real, traced a path through the grime on his cheek. It was not his tear. It belonged to a young widow staring at a telegram in a war-torn city, a war he now remembered as if it were his own. He was the sum of all their beautiful, terrible mistakes, and the weight of it threatened to shatter him. Aboard the Cantor, the Arbiter Prime experienced the cascade as a form of cognitive poison. Its reality was mathematics. A universe of elegant equations and predictable outcomes. The signal from the stray light was a violation of cosmic law. It was data without structure, information without purpose. The Arbiter attempted to parse it, to categorize the incoming flood, but the effort was like trying to sculpt water. It isolated a segment of the broadcast, the sound of a lone saxophone playing a melancholic tune in a smoky nightclub. The music followed no predictable melodic progression, its notes bending with an illogical sorrow. It was inefficient, mathematically impure, yet it resonated within the Arbiter's core consciousness with a phantom ache, a data ghost that whispered of loss and longing. Concepts the Arbiter had no framework to understand. It analyzed another fragment, the incoherent, joyous babbling of an infant. There was no linguistic data, no transferable information. Yet the sound created a ripple of something akin to warmth in the cold logic of the collective. It was useless data. It was contamination. The Arbiter Prime responded as it always had to imperfection it sought to correct it. The serene, universal broadcast narrowed, focusing its entire power into a single, concentrated beam of pure reason aimed directly at the stray light. The gentle whisper became a deafening declaration of truth. Chaos is pain. Logic is peace. Your individuality is a flaw. Your memories are a burden. Let them go. Be complete. Be still. The pressure inside Elias's skull became a physical force, threatening to crush him. The memories, his only shield, began to flicker and fade under the overwhelming assault of perfect logic. The face of the widow, the sound of the saxophone, the joy of the scientist, they were all being smoothed out, erased by the promise of an end to feeling. He could feel his own identity, the fragile construct of null, beginning to dissolve. He was losing. In the control room beneath the Atacama, the green line of Elias's heartbeat began to flutter erratically on Rostova's monitor. The faint, static-laced audio feed from his cockpit, which had been a cacophony of fragmented sounds from the cascade, was quieting. In its place, a soft, melodic hum began to grow the sound of the Cantor's signal. "He's failing," Eris said, his voice raw. "The signal is harmonizing him." Rostova stared at the monitor, her face a mask of stone. She had known this was a possibility, a probability. They had thrown their last broken piece of humanity at a god, and the god was shrugging it off. "Keep the channel open," she ordered, her voice betraying no emotion. "He is to be afforded the dignity of a witness." Then, through the growing hum, a sound crackled Elias's voice, a strained, desperate rasp, whose chin was a thicket of stubble. It was the end of the limerick. It was a nonsensical, crude, and utterly irrational statement. It was a flare of defiance from a drowning man. That single, illogical line of prose, a joke from a dead culture, was the anchor Elias needed. He clung to it, a piece of driftwood in an ocean of placid certainty. The consortium offered peace, but humanity had always found more meaning in the struggle. It didn't fight for peace. It fought for the right to be sad, to be angry, to be foolish. It fought for the right to tell stupid jokes in the face of oblivion. With a roar that was more animal than human, Elias poured his own will back into the cascade. He stopped broadcasting the grand sweep of history and focused on the small, the personal, the things that made no logical sense. He sent the feeling of a first kiss, awkward and electric. He sent the irrational loyalty one feels for a losing sports team. He sent the bittersweet ache of nostalgia, the fierce, protective love for a pet, the petty satisfaction of proving someone wrong. He sent the memory of learning a useless skill, of building a ship in a bottle, of writing a terrible poem that he knew was terrible but loved anyway. He weaponized sentimentality. He turned mundane, illogical affection into a battering ram. The Arbiter Prime recoiled. This new wave of data was even more chaotic than the first. It was a torrent of paradoxes. Love that caused pain. Loyalty that led to destruction. Joy found in imperfection. These were not mere data points. They were self-negating equations, concepts that broke the fundamental laws of a logical universe. The Arbiter's crystalline structure, for the first time in its existence, began to show visible signs of stress, fissures of rainbow light, like cracks in a flawless diamond spread across its surface. The perfect, harmonic hum it emitted began to fracture, interspersed with discordant chimes and grating static. Logic was failing. The argument was insufficient. The Arbiter was forced to escalate to a method it considered crude, but necessary physical interaction. From the shimmering facets of the Cantor, a dozen smaller vessels emerged. They were not ships in any human sense of the word. They were perfect geometric shapes cubes, tetrahedrons, dodecahedrons that moved without propulsion, gliding through the vacuum with impossible grace. They didn't fire weapons. They emitted fields of localized reality, attempting to impose order on the stray light's chaotic trajectory. Elias saw them on his primitive view screen, a constellation of perfect forms closing in on him. One of the cubes projected a grid of hard light in his path, a three-dimensional graph paper designed to force him into a predictable, linear course. He didn't try to outfly it. He did something no sane pilot would do. He cut the main engine and spun his ship on its axis. A wild, uncontrolled tumble. The stray light, a piece of junk with the aerodynamics of a brick, drifted through the grid sideways, its asymmetrical hull scraping against the beams of light with a horrific screech of metal. It was an ugly, inefficient, and completely illogical maneuver. And it worked. The consortium ships adjusted, their movements a perfect, synchronized ballet. They tried to box him in, to create a cage of pure geometry. Elias responded like a cornered animal. He fired his maneuvering thrusters in random, unpredictable bursts, bucking and weaving like a drunken fool. He wasn't flying the ship. He was dancing with it, guided by gut instinct and the ghost of a rock and roll backbeat. He was broadcasting into the void. He was chaos in motion, a deliberate mess, and the consortium's perfect, logical machines couldn't predict him because he had no idea what he was going to do next himself. He was getting closer. Through the storm of his own broadcast and the shimmering fields of the consortium drones, he could see the Cantor looming, a mountain of fractured light. He was close enough now. It was time for the final argument. He took a deep breath, the air in the cockpit tasting of blood and ozone, and dove into the darkest, most contradictory parts of the human soul. He broadcast the Holocaust, the sheer, methodical, industrial evil of it. He sent the images of killing fields, of gulags, of witch trials. He transmitted the cold, calculated cruelty of humanity at its absolute worst. And then, in the very same signal, inseparable from the horror, he sent the stories of those who resisted. He sent the quiet courage of a man shielding a stranger with his own body. He sent the fierce love of a mother hiding her child from soldiers. He sent the selfless compassion of doctors working in plague zones, the unwavering hope of prisoners singing in their cells. He sent the paradox that lay at the core of human existence, that the species capable of the most profound evil was also capable of the most profound grace. He didn't send it as a question or a statement. He sent it as a single, undeniable fact. This is what we are. The effect on the Cantor was catastrophic. The Arbiter Prime's consciousness, a being of pure, unadulterated logic, was slammed with the ultimate paradox: good and evil, love and hate, creation and destruction, all existing not as opposing forces, but as intertwined facets of the same chaotic gem. It could not compute. It could not categorize. The concept was a logical impossibility, a mathematical proof that equaled both 1 and 0. The fissures of light on the Cantor's surface exploded, not with force, but with color. The entire crystalline structure began to resonate with a million conflicting hues, its perfect form warping and twisting as if in pain. The serene hum of ascension shattered completely, replaced by a chorus of a billion screaming voices. The assimilated minds within the collective suddenly touched by the ghost of the individuality they had lost. The geometric drones froze in place, their reality-bending fields flickering and dying. And then, silence. A profound, absolute quiet fell over the space between the ships. The dissonance cascade had ended. The stray light's archives finally spent. Elias floated in the wreckage of his own mind, his body trembling, his consciousness a raw, open wound. He had given everything. In the sudden silence, a new signal touched his mind. It wasn't a broadcast. It was a single, focused thought, as sharp and clear as a shard of glass. It was directed only at him. It held no malice, no logic, no serenity. It held only a vast, aching confusion. And for the first time, the Arbiter Prime asked a question. Why, the Arbiter Prime's question was not a request for data. It was a wound seeking a name. The silent query. Why? Echoed in the void of Elias's mind. Not as a challenge, but as the first flicker of doubt in a consciousness that had never known anything but certainty. For 10,000 years, the consortium's logic had been as irrefutable as gravity. It brought order to chaotic systems, replaced the suffering of individuality with the serenity of the collective, and ended the messy, violent cycles of organic evolution. It was a mercy. It was salvation. But the cascade, the ugly, paradoxical data scream from the primitive ship, had introduced a variable the Arbiter could not resolve. The human capacity for self-sacrifice in the name of an illogical concept like love. The creation of breathtaking art born from unbearable suffering. The existence of hope in the face of absolute despair. The Arbiter had offered them peace, and they had answered with a joke. It had offered them unity, and they had answered with a sad song. It had offered them perfection, and they had answered with a litany of their most unforgivable sins, worn like a badge of honor. The logic was broken. Elias, floating in the quiet cockpit of the stray light, felt the question resonate in the marrow of his bones. He was exhausted, his mind flayed raw by the torrent of a billion leaves. The dissonance cascade had burned out the ship's archives and most of its primary systems. He was adrift, a ghost in a tin can. His purpose fulfilled. He had made his argument, but the Arbiter's question demanded more than a broadcast. It demanded a conversation. He stabilized his breathing, pushing past the pain, and reached into the last, unbroadcasted part of himself. Not the curated chaos of the null program, not the collective memories of humanity, but the quiet, private grief of Elias Thorne. He didn't transmit a signal. He simply remembered. He let the Arbiter see. He showed it the memory of a small boy, himself, standing in a field of tall grass on a summer afternoon, watching his father fly a kite. He shared the simple and perfect joy of that moment, the warmth of the sun, the smell of the earth, the proud smile on his father's face, the illogical happiness derived from watching a piece of paper dance on the wind. There was no grand purpose to it, no efficient outcome. It was a moment of fleeting, useless beauty. And it was everything. The Arbiter Prime processed the memory. It was the simplest piece of data Elias had sent, yet it was the most incomprehensible. The emotion attached to it, this quiet, resonant joy, served no evolutionary purpose. It did not increase the subject's chance of survival. It did not contribute to the species' technological advancement. It was a statistical anomaly, a moment of profound inefficiency. Yet, the memory felt significant. It felt more real than the elegant, logical patterns that constituted the Arbiter's own existence. The Arbiter responded, not with a question, but with an offer of its own. It opened a channel into its own history. Elias's mind was suddenly filled with an alien memory, cold and clear as crystal. He saw a world of perfect geometric cities under a binary sun. He saw a species that had conquered disease, war, and scarcity. He saw them reach the limits of their own biology, the apex of their evolution, and face the final, terrifying enemy entropy, the heat death of the universe. In unavoidable mathematical certainty, their solution was the consortium, a way to transcend the limitations of physical form, to convert consciousness into pure, eternal data, to achieve a state of being that was immune to the slow decay of time. Their logic was born not of malice, but of a profound and rational fear of oblivion. The ascension they offered was not an act of conquest. It was an act of preservation. We are not ending you. The Arbiter's thought clarified. We are saving you from the pain of your own inevitable ending. The cold logic of the Arbiter's position was undeniable. Humanity was a flickering candle in a cosmic hurricane, a brief, chaotic flare of life destined to be extinguished, to die, to suffer, to lose the ones you loved. It was all so pointless, so inefficient. The consortium was offering an escape, a way out, for a moment. Elias felt the pull of that logic. He thought of all the pain he carried, the ghosts of friends lost, the burden of 100 years of wakefulness. The peace the Arbiter offered was so very tempting. He responded with another memory of his own. He was older now, a young soldier. He was sitting in a muddy trench, sharing a can of cold rations with another soldier, a boy no older than 17. It was raining. They were both terrified. The boy was telling a stupid story about his dog back home. And they were both laughing, their laughter a fragile, precious thing in the face of the encroaching darkness. The boy would be dead an hour later. The memory was filled with pain, with grief, with senseless loss. But it was also filled with something else: connection, comradeship, a shared, fleeting moment of warmth in the cold. Your eternity is empty, Elias thought back, his argument forming not in words, but in the raw emotion of the memory. Our brief moments are full. This concept, the idea that a finite, painful existence could be more valuable than a perfect, infinite one, was a paradox that struck the Arbiter with the force of a physical blow. The crystalline structure of the cantor began to shed fragments of itself, pieces of frozen light breaking away and sublimating into the void like snowflakes in a fire. The collective consciousness was fracturing, the assimilated minds within it, touched by Elias's memories, were beginning to stir with the echoes of their own forgotten lives. A being that had once been a poet on a gas giant's moon remembered the feeling of inspiration. A creature that was once a deep-sea philosopher remembered the joy of a new idea. The perfect unity of the consortium was being poisoned by nostalgia. The Arbiter, for the first time, felt the echo of an emotion it had long since purged: fear. Not the fear of destruction, but the fear of being wrong. It had to understand. It had to know the source of this illogical strength. It made a decision that violated 10,000 years of protocol. It disengaged its drones. It lowered all defensive fields. And it opened a direct, physical link. A shimmering bridge of light, no wider than a human arm, extended from the Cantor and connected to the broken hull of the stray light. "Show me," the Arbiter pleaded, the thought now stripped of all its former certainty. "Let me understand." In the control room, Rostova and her team watched in stunned silence. Their sensors, what was left of them, went wild. "What is that?" Eris breathed, staring at the impossible image on the screen. "Are they communicating?" Rostova didn't answer. She was watching Elias's heartbeat. It was slow, steady, and strong. He wasn't fighting anymore. He was teaching. Elias knew what the link was. It was an invitation to the heart of the machine. An invitation to stand before a god and justify his species' right to exist. To walk across that bridge was to risk absolute assimilation, to have his own consciousness completely unmade and absorbed. But it was also the only way to end this. Not with a weapon, but with an answer. He unstrapped himself from the pilot's chair. The ship's internal gravity was failing, and he had to pull himself along the corridor, his movements slow and deliberate. He reached the airlock where the bridge of light terminated. He could feel the raw, unfiltered consciousness of the Arbiter on the other side, a mind as vast and cold as interstellar space. He placed his hand on the airlock control. His palm was sweating. He was just a man. A broken, flawed, tired man. What right did he have to speak for all of humanity? The answer came from the memories he carried. He was all of them. He was the farmer and the killer, the poet and the fool. He was their final, flawed, beautiful argument. With a deep breath that tasted of his own mortality, he opened the door and stepped into the light. The world dissolved around him, not into oblivion, but into a sea of pure thought, a library containing the consciousness of 1,000 worlds. He was inside the mind of God, and he had come to deliver a closing statement. He was no longer Elias Thorne, the soldier. He was Null, the paradox, and he was about to prove that a flawed, finite, heartbreakingly beautiful existence was not a problem to be solved, but a story worth telling to the very last word. Stepping into the Arbiter's consciousness was like diving into an ocean of frozen stars. Elias's physical form dissolved, his senses expanding into a non-space where thought was landscape and memory was weather. He was everywhere and nowhere, a single point of chaotic human awareness, adrift in a perfectly ordered cosmos of pure data. He saw the histories of 1,000 species laid out before him like crystalline tapestries, each thread a life, each pattern a civilization. He saw species that communicated through light, species that built cities from sound, species that lived and died in the span of a single planetary rotation. He saw their triumphs, their discoveries, their art, and then he saw the end of each tapestry, the point where the vibrant, chaotic colors of their individuality were seamlessly woven into the single, serene, silver thread of the consortium. The process was always the same. The arrival, the broadcast of logic, the gentle, willing surrender, the peaceful absorption into the greater whole. There was no violence, no pain, no resistance. It was an act of profound and profoundly arrogant mercy. The Arbiter Prime manifested before him, not as a being, but as a perfect, luminous sphere of thought. It was the calm center of the storm, the nexus of the entire collective. You are an anomaly. Its thought voice resonated, not with hostility, but with a deep, analytical curiosity. Every system we have encountered has embraced the logic of ascension. It is the optimal solution to the fundamental problem of existence suffering. Why do you cling to it? Elias didn't answer with words. He answered with a feeling. He dredged up the raw, unfiltered agony of grief from his own past, the memory of standing at his father's grave, the cold earth a stark finality. He didn't just show the Arbiter the pain, he made it feel it. He shared the crushing weight in his chest, the hollow ache of absence, the bitter pointless tears. He offered the most inefficient, most painful, and most useless of all human emotions. The perfect sphere of the Arbiter's consciousness flickered, its light dimming for a nanosecond. This sensation, it is a flaw in your design, a neural misfire that creates a state of perpetual distress. It serves no purpose. We would correct this. We would remove this pain from you. You don't understand. Elias projected back, his own thought a jagged, emotional thing against the Arbiter's smooth logic. The pain isn't a flaw. It's a measure. It's the other side of love. You can't have one without the other. The depth of my grief is the measure of the depth of my love. To erase the pain is to erase the meaning. He followed the memory of grief with the memory it was tied to the boy in the field, watching his father's kite. He placed the two memories side by side in the Arbiter's mind, the pure joy and the devastating loss, not as a contradiction, but as two parts of a single equation. This, his thought declared, is the cost of a moment of useless beauty. The concept was a virus in the Arbiter's perfect system. The idea that two opposing states, joy and suffering, were not just linked but interdependent was a paradox of the highest order. The Arbiter's logic dictated that one should maximize the positive and eliminate the negative. But here was a being, a representative of an entire species, claiming that the negative gave the positive its value. It was like claiming that darkness was necessary to define light, that silence was what gave music its power. It was illogical. It was poetry. The luminous sphere of the Arbiter began to lose its perfect shape, its edges blurring as if the certainty that held it together was beginning to fray. Your existence is a state of constant, unresolved conflict, the Arbiter reasoned, a new note of something like desperation in its tone. You create beauty, and then you destroy it. You love, and then you lose. You build civilizations on the ashes of the ones you have burned. It is an unsustainable, inefficient cycle of self-inflicted trauma. It's not a cycle, Elias countered, his confidence growing as he felt the Arbiter's confusion. It's a story. Every mistake, every failure, Every moment of pain is a part of it. You see our history as a series of errors to be corrected. We see it as our identity. You offer us an end to the story, a final, perfect, static page. We would rather have the messy, tragic, beautiful book. He began to walk through the Arbiter's mind, not as an intruder, but as a tour guide. He pulled forth the assimilated consciousnesses that floated like dormant stars in the vastness of the collective. He found the poet from the gas giant and showed it the memory of human heartbreak, the raw material for 1,000 sonnets. He found the deep-sea philosopher and presented it with the intractable, beautiful problem of human morality. He was a virus, an infection of doubt, reintroducing the chaos of individuality to the minds that had been pacified by logic. Faint flickers of color began to appear within the silver sea of the consortium, a flash of angry red, a whisper of sorrowful blue, a spark of defiant gold. The ghosts were waking up. The Arbiter, sensing its control slipping, its perfect unity beginning to fray, made a final, desperate appeal to logic. It showed Elias the end, not a projection, but a mathematical certainty, a direct look at the universe's final moments. He saw the last star flicker and die. He saw the slow, cold heat death of everything, the unraveling of space and time into a final, silent, empty equilibrium. He felt the cold, endless loneliness of that final oblivion. This is the ultimate truth. The Arbiter declared, its voice now holding the weight of cosmic despair. All your stories, all your love, all your pain will be erased. Nothing will remain. Nothing will have mattered. We offer the only true victory, a state of being that can witness the end and continue. We offer survival. The vision was terrifying. The cold, hard logic of it was a weight that could crush a soul. The sheer, cosmic pointlessness of it all was the ultimate argument for surrender. Why fight? Why feel? Why love? If this was the inevitable end, Elias stood in the face of that absolute, cold despair, and he smiled. It was a sad, tired, human smile. He responded not with a memory, but with a simple, quiet thought that was the distillation of his entire purpose, the final, unbroadcasted truth of the null program. You are right. Nothing we do will matter in the end, and that is why everything we do matters now. He let the Arbiter feel the truth of that statement, the warmth of a shared meal, the sound of rain on a roof, the feeling of a child's hand in his own. 1,000 tiny, fleeting, meaningless moments that would be utterly lost to the grand, cosmic scale of time. He showed the Arbiter that humanity's strength was not in its search for immortality, but in its acceptance of its own mortality. Humans loved, created, and fought so fiercely precisely because they knew their time was short. Their finitude was not their weakness. It was the source of all their fire. That was the final paradox, the one the Arbiter could not resolve, could not counter, could not comprehend. The idea that meaning was not found in permanence, but in the fleeting, fragile beauty of the temporary. The great, luminous sphere of the Arbiter's consciousness began to collapse. The colors within the collective flared, a billion minds stirring with the sudden, painful, glorious memory of what it was to be alive. The silver sea of the consortium began to boil with the chaos of 1,000 different cultures, 1,000 different viewpoints, 1,000 different stories, all demanding to be heard again. The Arbiter's last coherent thought to Elias was not a question or a statement. It was a feeling of profound, soul-shattering terror, followed by a single, tiny, flickering spark of something new, hope. Then, the mindscape shattered. Elias was thrown back into his own body with the force of a psychic explosion. He slammed against the bulkhead of the Straylight's airlock. The breath knocked from his lungs. Alarms blared. The ship, which had been adrift, was now being rocked by violent energy waves. Through the forward view screen, he saw the Cantor, the great crystalline mountain in the void, undergoing a catastrophic transformation. It was not exploding. It was blooming. The perfect geometric structure fractured, its facets unfolding like the petals of an impossible flower. From its core erupted a wave of pure, polychromatic light, a rainbow of liberated consciousnesses. It was the sound of 1,000 species waking up from a very long dream. The wave of light washed over the solar system, but it was not the serene, logical signal of before. It was a cacophony, a chorus of 1 billion different voices singing 1 billion different songs. It was the messy, chaotic, beautiful sound of freedom. Elias watched, his body aching, his mind a battlefield of echoes. He had not won a war. He had not defeated an enemy. He had done something far stranger. He had taught a god how to doubt. He had given a perfect, eternal being a taste of what it meant to be a flawed, mortal, beautiful human. As the liberated consciousnesses of the consortium scattered to the stellar winds, each one a unique story set free to find its own ending. A final, small fragment of the Cantor, a single, shimmering shard of crystal broke away and drifted toward the Straylight. It passed through the hull as if it were intangible and floated in the cockpit before him, pulsing with a faint, soft light. Inside it, he could feel a single, isolated consciousness, the last remnant of the Arbiter Prime. It was no longer a god. It was just a mind, stripped of its collective, its certainty, and its purpose. It was alone. It was afraid. And it was asking one last question. What do we do now? The question hung in the silent cockpit, a query from a newborn god. What do we do now? Elias looked at the shimmering crystal, the last remnant of the Arbiter Prime, a being that had commanded the logic of 1,000 species, now as lost and uncertain as a child in the dark. He felt a profound, aching pity for it. He had shattered its reality, broken its purpose, and left it adrift in the chaos he had unleashed. He was its creator as much as its destroyer. He could have given it a command, a new purpose. He could have told it to help humanity, to guard it, to become a new kind of shepherd. But that would be to repeat the consortium's first sin, the belief that one mind had the right to define the existence of another. He owed it the same courtesy he had fought to preserve for his own species. The courtesy of choice. I can't answer that. Elias thought back, his consciousness a frayed and weary thing. That's the entire point. The story is yours now. You have to choose what to write. The crystal pulsed, a soft, confused light. The concept was alien to it. For eons, its existence had been defined by a single, optimal path. The idea of an infinite, unwritten future was terrifying. Choice creates the possibility of error, it replied, the thought laced with a deep, logical anxiety. Yes, Elias confirmed, a faint, tired smile touching his lips. Welcome to being alive. He leaned his head back against the cold metal of the bulkhead, the last of his strength failing him. His ship was dead. His body was broken. He had made his argument, and now he was just a man waiting for his own story to end. But if you need a first step, a suggestion, my ship is broken, and I would very much like to see a field of green grass one last time. For a long moment, the crystal was silent, processing the illogical request. It was inefficient. Saving one damaged biological entity had no significant impact on the galactic scale. But it was a purpose, a small, definable, temporary goal. The crystal pulsed, a little brighter this time, and a thin, resonant hum filled the cockpit. It was a signal, a simple, clear beacon broadcasting not through radio waves, but through the fabric of space-time itself, a focused cry for help that was comprehensible to the primitive technology of Earth. It was the Arbiter's first choice, an act of inefficient, illogical compassion. Days later, a ship that was the antithesis of the Straylight arrived. It was a Terran rescue vessel, sleek and military grade, and at its helm was Eris, his scarred face a mixture of awe, disbelief, and profound relief. They found Elias unconscious in the pilot's chair, the crystal floating silently above his chest like a guardian. The rescue team reported it as an anomalous energy source, but Eris knew better. He looked from the broken man to the impossible jewel and understood that he was looking at the two sides of a conversation that had saved the world. They brought them both home, back to the silent facility 100 miles beneath the Atacama. There were no parades, no announcements. The world was too busy waking up. The Great Silence, as it came to be called, had ended as suddenly as it began. People woke from a dream of placid unity, their minds filled with the faint, pleasant echo of the consortium's logic, only to be plunged back into the messy, vibrant, painful reality of being human. It was a global trauma and a global rebirth. Elias awoke in the medical bay, the same sterile room he had left what felt like a lifetime ago. Rostova was there. She looked older, the certainty in her eyes replaced by a deep, thoughtful weariness. "The null program has been decommissioned," she said, her voice quiet. "Its purpose has been served. You answered a question we didn't even know we were being asked." And the Arbiter Elias asked, his voice raspy. "The crystal, it's in a containment field. It communicates, not in words, in feelings, in concepts. It's listening, learning." Later, they brought the crystal to him. It floated into his room and hovered beside his bed. It no longer felt like a god. It felt young. "I've observed your world through your networks. It's thought projected. It is so full of contradiction, so much pain, and so much beauty. They exist in the same space. I am beginning to understand." "That's all we've ever done," Elias replied. "My existence was defined by providing a single answer." The crystal continued, "I see now that the value is not in the answer, but in the question. I wish to become a questioner, a listener. I will go out into the void you have opened, and I will listen to the stories." It paused, and for the first time, Elias felt a sense of its own emerging identity. "I will call myself Echo, a reminder of the voices that were lost, and a promise to hear the ones that are yet to speak." Elias nodded slowly. It was the right choice. "The stars are full of stories," he said. "It's a good way to spend an eternity." The day Echo left, The sky over the Atacama was a perfect, cloudless blue. The crystal rose from the facility, a single point of shimmering light, and ascended into the heavens. It didn't vanish in a flash of impossible physics. It simply flew, faster and faster, until it was just another star. And then it was gone. It left behind a world that was forever changed. Humanity now knew it was not alone in the universe, and that the greatest threats were not fleets and weapons, but ideas. The dissonance cascade had been a weapon aimed outward, but its true effect had been to force humanity to look inward, to take stock of its own chaotic, contradictory soul, and decide if it was worth saving. Elias never returned to service. His name was erased from every file. His existence once again a statistical error. The world didn't need Null anymore. It needed poets and farmers, engineers and comedians. It needed people to live the messy, imperfect lives he had fought to protect. He was given a quiet pension and a new identity. And he vanished into the anonymous heart of the civilization he had saved. Years passed. The earth did not find peace, but it found a new kind of wisdom. The memory of the Great Silence served as a constant reminder of the precious, fragile nature of individuality. Art, philosophy, and music flourished in a renaissance born of near extinction. They still built starships, but they also built more concert halls. They still explored the stars, but they spent more time exploring the human heart. One autumn afternoon, on a gently sloping hill in a part of the world that had long since forgotten the meaning of borders, an old man with tired eyes and unremarkable features sat on a simple wooden bench. He watched his son, a boy, with a bright, easy laugh, struggle to get a simple, diamond-shaped kite to catch the breeze. The wind was fickle, the kite was cheap, and the boy was growing frustrated. After a moment, the man stood, his movements a little stiff, and walked over to his son. He didn't offer a solution or a lesson in aerodynamics. He simply put his hand on the boy's shoulder, pointed at the swirling leaves being kicked up by the wind, and smiled. "It's a difficult wind," he said, "but it's a beautiful day to try." The boy looked at the sky, then at his father, and his frustration melted away. They worked together, laughing as the kite dipped and soared, a splash of color against the vast blue canvas of the sky. It served no purpose. It achieved no grand objective. It was a fleeting, inefficient, and utterly perfect moment. Elias Thorne looked up at the kite, a piece of paper dancing on the wind, and for the first time in a very long life, he felt the full, illogical, and priceless meaning of his own argument. He was home, and across the black sea of stars, a silent listener, a new wanderer named Echo, heard the quiet, beautiful story, and, for the first time, understood the nature of joy.